Ever since Until Dawn's release in 2015, Supermassive Games has leaned really heavily into this controllable horror movie experience of games they've been making. Until Dawn was kind of the first big breakout for that, which was a PlayStation exclusive. It was followed by a number of smaller releases with the Dark Pictures anthologies, games that were, the same basic concept as Until Dawn, but scaled down in size, shorter stories, smaller casts, and at a lower price point. And while I've enjoyed playing through all of these games, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I definitely preferred the kind of larger, bigger experience that Until Dawn had to offer over the Dark Picture games. And now we have the opportunity of playing something else in that vein with The Quarry, something that is effectively a sequel to Until Dawn in terms of that kind of cast size, length of storytelling, and really the most noticeable thing out of everything, budget. Before moving on, I do want to thank 2K Games for supplying the review key for this game. It is available on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Series S and X, PC. My particular experiences and the gameplay that you're going to be seeing captured here is based on the PS5 version. Because this is such a narrative-focused game, because it's essentially a movie you control, the intention of this review is to be as spoiler-free as possible. All the gameplay and cutscenes I'm going to be showing are from the first couple chapters of the game, leaving the rest of it to be a nice surprise for those of you that play it. If you've never played any of these style of games before from Supermassive Games, the general structure is pretty consistent across all of them. You have a main cast of characters that you're going to be constantly swapping between POVs of, and for the most part, it's a very linear movie-style storytelling experience. There are going to be moments where you have more free control of a character and can walk around and explore a little bit and look at things, but for the most part, that just kind of breaks up the momentum between more dedicated cutscenes, where you're really more focused on trying to make certain decisions under pressure, as well as going through QTEs that basically help shape where the story goes, and whether or not all the playable characters end up surviving the story. Each of these games have offered their own little refinements, new features, just little add-ons that constantly build on this experience, and The Quarry is another pretty large step in that, especially because it is their newest kind of big dedicated game and not part of that smaller Dark Pictures sub-series. And I gotta say, it absolutely shows. I mean, I've enjoyed the Dark Pictures games, they've been fun little experiences, but none of them, again, have really held up to what I liked about Until Dawn, and The Quarry absolutely delivers on that. And the first thing I really want to talk about is face capture. There's gameplay stuff I want to talk about too, but really the motion and face capture in this game is one of the things that immediately grabbed me about it. Because one of the things that's come up in a lot of their past games is that, especially when you're trying to do this very sort of realistic movie style way of telling a story, and you're relying on using real actors, it can be a little awkward sometimes when you hit that uncanny valley level where something, looks mostly right, but there's just certain things that might be off. The eyes might be a little weird, the way a head might move might throw you off, things that just make the experience a little bit off-putting. I found that this happened every now and then a lot with the Dark Pictures games, and in The Quarry, hasn't really been an issue. The face capture in this game is absolutely phenomenal. The quality of the face capture performances does vary a little bit from character to character. There are some who just more consistently look very realistic more often compared to others. But in general, I would say across the board, most of the characters are excellent. There was really only one specific character that I think more often than not gave me a bit of that uncanny valley feeling. But thankfully, that is the one notable exception, with everyone else looking great. To the point at which where there were multiple occasions where, given I was also playing this game very late into the night, was getting a little tired during some of it, there were absolutely some moments where my brain just went, this isn't real actors, right? Like this is still a game I'm playing, right? They didn't switch to real live actors, because there are some absolutely tremendously good looking scenes. Because a large part of the focus here is trying to give the game a very cinematic movie-style feel, also the vast majority of the gameplay is handled in 2:3:9 rather than 16:9. You're still making use of the full 16:9 because that's where a lot of the UI elements can come up, like when you're making certain decisions, but as far as the visuals for all the storytelling going on, that's kept in a 2:3:9 aspect ratio, which really helps to sell that movie feel, and which is why I've also kind of gone with it for this video. Now, while I can't speak to how the visuals hold up across all platforms, I can say that for the PS5, the game looks and runs really well. The frame rate keeps at a steady 60 FPS. There is an occasional moment where lighting adjusts or certain scenes lightly change, but those are very much the exception and not the standard rule for regular gameplay. Normally graphics aren't something that I lean heavily into as far as how I weigh, how important that is to the overall game, but for something like this where the goal is to really be this movie-style experience, it's something that's a lot more important, and in my opinion, it really feels like they nailed it. Gameplay, on the other hand, I have a slightly different opinion. It's not bad by any means, and if you've played any of the previous titles of this style, you're going to know exactly what you're getting into. There are quick-time events, there are moments where you're required to hold your breath, and there are some very light, actiony moments that involve aiming and firing a gun. While in concept all this is very similar to the past games, it looks like there was a general motion towards making a lot of it as simple and honestly just overall a lot easier than in past titles, which I'm a little mixed about. In some of the past games like Until Dawn, you would make use of multiple buttons on the controller, there would be motion control segments, there's lots of different things going on all at once. Whereas in the Quarry, QuickTime events boil down entirely to press the left stick in one of 4 directions, and then either mash or hold X depending on whether you're trying to struggle with an object or hold your breath to stay quiet. For me at least, one of the things I appreciate about those older games is that there is the chance that I could mess up on something because my reflexes weren't fast enough, and the story takes a turn because a character got messed up or even straight up killed, and now I have to move on and deal with that. And I just never really had that feeling or worry throughout my entire time of playing Quarry. I appreciate the accessibility options that opens this up a lot more, giving you more customization for things like timing windows and what style inputs are necessary, but because those do exist, I really wish the baseline was a little higher. This doesn't really ruin my experience with this game. I don't think that this is the difference between it being good and bad, but I do think that it is the kind of thing where that would have been that extra little push to really make me walk away loving the experience. As for the story itself being told in the game, overall, I feel like it's a pretty strong one. I mean, one of the things that ends up having to be a little bit of a concession in storytelling with games like this is that ultimately, you're never going to have the same full degree of payoff that an intentionally constructed plot is going to have. Accounting for all the different ways that certain decisions can play out and what happens when certain characters die when is always going to lead to a little bit more uneven plot storytelling depending on what happens in your particular playthrough. But I do think the Quarry really pulls off the most cohesive storytelling out of all their past games. All their games, including Until Dawn, have always suffered from occasionally really awkward transitions because they're doing their best to kind of rein in, okay, here's a part where a bunch of different decisions recollapse into one moment, and some of those transition a lot smoother than others. While that is something that's still present in the Quarry, it feels like it happened way less often, at least in my own personal experience and the playthroughs that I have done so far. The transitions between scenes and the way that character storylines kind of get wrangled together mostly flows really, really well. And this also applies to the actual story itself. One of the things that has been present in a lot of the past games is they try to juggle multiple horror-themed tropes and stories at once, kind of keeping you on your toes a little bit about what kind of story you're actually playing through. And the Quarry drops that a little bit, instead harder leans into the genres that it's being more honest about right away. And I think this works out a lot more for the better. I don't want to get into spoiler territory about this and talk about, what specifically happened in my playthrough, but I will say that overall, I was really satisfied with how the story played out. There were a few specific character arcs that were a little awkward because, again, plot branching is a thing, and so certain plot tangents didn't get fully explored based on the decisions that I made. But that's all the more reason why I'm curious to go back and really see how certain things change stuff up. Now, aside from the core single-player experience, there are a couple other ways that you can play and experience the Quarry, some of which are returning from past games, and some of which are new. There is the returning couch co-op mode where you have the ability to assign different characters to different player names. You're not actually using different controllers, but the idea is when a certain player's turn comes up, the screen takes a moment to say, hey, pass the controller over to this guy, and it's their turn to make decisions and do things in game and see how the plot plays out, which I think is a really fun, just communal multiplayer way of getting through these stories, which technically, yes, it is something that you don't necessarily need a official mode to support. You could just pass a controller to someone when it's their character's turn, but it's really nice having that time where you get that little ahead of time warning, letting you know, hey, whose turn it is to actually go to. It just facilitates the whole thing a lot better. On top of this, there's now also a movie mode, which basically entirely removes the gameplay from the game. You're allowed to pick from 2 pre-designed versions of the movie where everyone dies horrible deaths, or everyone survives, or you can even do a mode called Director's Cut, where you don't get complete perfect control over how the story is shaped, but you can choose all the different kind of personality archetypes for how each character will act, what they will do in certain situations, and see how all of that plays out over the course of the story. There is also a 4th mode that is not currently in the game yet. It was delayed until early July, which is Wolfpack mode, which is an online multiplayer mode. Obviously, I can't really share any full thoughts on how it is to play this because it doesn't exist yet. The basic concept, though, is that you're able to do an online multiplayer game with friends where when things come up, you guys vote over what you want to see have happen and see how it all plays out, which sounds really chaotic and fun to me, but just not out yet. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. After finishing my playthrough of the Quarry, as well as messing around with, re-exploring certain decisions and planning to do another playthrough where I'm going to do a lot of things very differently, one of the main thoughts I've really debated with is how do I rank this up against Until Dawn? I immediately know that I like it more than any of the Dark Pictures. Not that I dislike those games, it's just this is a bigger, better version of those, and I've really enjoyed my time with. Yeah, there are certain specific things about Until Dawn that I think I like a little more, including some specific character performances, but really, when I look at the full experience, the flow of the storytelling, the refinements to the gameplay, I think the Quarry is now my favorite thing they've released. I mean, really, aside from my one hang-up of wishing the baseline difficulty was a little higher, this game absolutely delivers on the exact premise that it's offering. If you want a horror movie that you have a degree of control over, that you guide the story and do your best to get through and, get everyone alive and as well as play with friends on the couch, I think it's an excellent new addition and is a really great sign of not only just it itself being a good game, but I love that it's a sign of just the kind of continuing growth of what Supermassive is doing with these titles, and it makes me even more excited for what they might have in store for the future. It is a very specific type of game that is not for everyone. I have a lot of friends who have, I've played past games with them and it just doesn't click. It's just not their kind of thing. But if you've enjoyed any of the past Supermassive stuff, especially Until Dawn, I think this is an automatic thing you should try. And if you've never played any of these games before and you're curious about it, I definitely think it's worth doing. Maybe check out Until Dawn just because it goes on sale a little more often being an older title. It's also just still an excellent game to play, and as soon as you're done with that one, if you enjoyed it, jump right into Quarry because it is a great follow-up. So those are my thoughts on the Quarry. If you're interested in picking the game up, I do have a link down below in the description. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. I especially appreciate it on this one because reviews are something that I've missed doing for a long time, and I'm starting to ramp them up a little more this year. So if you've been enjoying this content, please make sure to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.